Our second speaker is Rebekah Lubosco-Gilly, who is a doctoral candidate in musicology at the University of Toronto. She holds a BA in music history and literature from the University of Rhode Island and an MA from Tufts University. Her dissertation is on the automaton Olympia from Offenbacher's Les Contes d'Hoffmann. Rebekah is specifically interested in investigating the implications of this character's portrayal on stage with both historical and modern stagings. She is also interested in popular music and film music studies, and her research has been published in the volume The Queer in the Choir Room, Essays on Gender and Sexuality in Glee, published in 2014. Rebekah's paper today is Lighting the Way to Freedom, Janelle Monáe's Afrofuturism, Feminism in Many Moons, the video.
Fritz Lang's Metropolis and its robot Maria do not lack for attention, both scholarly and within American popular culture. Numerous examples of female androids, also called gynoids, inspired by Lang's robot Maria, have cropped up consistently for over the last 75 years in literature, movies, and more recently, video games and music videos. While the discussions that surround both the original character and its reincarnations are informative and compelling, many do not consider or include race as an aspect of analysis. Rarer still in these discussions is an inclusion of queerness in dialogue with race. Musician Janelle Monáe has done just that, providing a new voice and perspective through the distinct attention she gives to issues surrounding race, gender, and queerness. By providing a close reading of Monáe's first music video, Many Moons, from 2008, I argue that the multiple ways in which she positions herself in male-dominated Afrofuturist traditions pushes the boundaries outward towards a new way Black female bodies can be represented. The video's aesthetics, in conjunction with the music and lyrics, showcase Monáe's engagement with what African-American studies theorist Susanna M. Morris calls Afrofuturist feminism, while also using androgyny, gender bending, and racialized imagery within the video to further open the discourse of Afrofuturist feminism to non-normative gender identities. From Monáe's conscientious choice of hairstyles and clothes to her play with racialized, gendered bodies and multi-egos, Monáe positions herself as a bell hooksian liberated voice for the underrepresented Black female in contemporary North American culture, as well as Afrofuturist traditions. This liberated voice is one that asserts its agency. As Bell Hooks says, moving from silence into speech is for the oppressed, the colonized, the exploited, and those who stand and struggle side by side, a gesture of defiance that heals. It is the act of speech, of talking back, that is no mere gesture of empty words, that is the expression of our movement, from object to subject, the liberated voice. So the question I ask in this paper is, how does she gain this agency to become the liberated voice? To begin answering this question, it's important to understand the Afrofuturist feminist framework Monáe is operating through. The first half of this term, Afrofuturism, can best be understood as a framework for understanding our analysis and provides a way for a new kind of past and future to be imagined, which in turn has the ability to alter and reimagine the present. For Afrofuturist thinkers, the Black community is not just included as a part of a new future, they are the whole of the future. This is done through the appropriation of science fiction narratives, bringing together two racialized fictions of black magic and white science, which must be consistently assumed as opposing polarized concepts. Think black magic, voodoo, earthy, dirty, and white science as chrome, sterile, white lab suits, full head to toe, no bodies touching, no body at all. And while this premise can be unstable and potentially just another way to detrimentally label anything thought of as Black, another gigantic issue sits on the sidelines of Afrofuturist discourse, and that's gender. In her article, Robo-Devo R&B, Aesthetics, Politics, and Black Female Robots in Contemporary Popular Music, Robin James critiques the seminal Afrofuturist writings of Kodwo Oshun, noting that women and issues of gender are almost entirely left out of his work, which is not an uncommon occurrence. James seeks to continue the conversation of posthumanism and cyborg theory as it relates to Afrofuturism, expanding it to include discussions focused on women and gender discourse. Susanna M. Morris then takes James's work a step further by placing Afrofuturism and Black feminism in dialogue with each other. The most important aspect of Black feminist thought for this combination is its intersectionality. Black feminism argues that sexism, class oppression, racism, and gender identity are inextricably linked, so that while each aspect is worth considering on its own, how they overlap and interact is at least as important as each piece on its own. It is through this Afrofuturist feminist understanding that I approach Monet in her video For Many Moons. The video's concept begins with the overarching narrative from Monet's 2007 EP, Metropolis Suite 1, The Chase, and there's the cover, which in many ways dramatically reimagines Lang's Metropolis, though she does keep a few things consistent. Monet begins her narrative in the year 2719. It is the birth year of the android Cindy Mayweather, which is Monet's alter egoist persona. Earth has been decimated after 5 world wars, and only Metropolis remains, the one last great city that provides opportunities for those with nowhere else to go, but has a decadent and corrupt government abusing its power. Alpha Platinum 9000 android number 57821, Cindy Mayweather, is unlike other androids in that her programming includes a rockstar proficiency package and a working soul. Mayweather becomes the voice of a new and rebellious form of popular music named cybersoul, soon further breaking the rules by falling in love with a human. As androids were decreed that they should never know love, Metropolis Suite 1, The Chase, begins with the announcement of the Star Commissioners calling for Mayweather's disassembly, which includes her soul. Monet's reimagined Metropolis is heavily influenced by Afrofuturist thought, though there is definite overlap with Lang's original futurist megalopolis. One important similarity is the function of the imagined city. In a discussion of utopias of cinema, film theorist Regine Michal Friedman defines Lang's Metropolis as a nowhere city built upon virtual space. Monet's version of the city is, in essence, the same. In both conceptualizations, the city stands as both the ultimate utopia and dystopia, or anti-utopia. Another crossover between the two narratives and the function of the android is the function of the android, though Monet does diverge at key points from the original function of Robot Maria. The androids are similar in that they represent a simultaneous fear of technology and women, which are both considered by those in power to be uncontrollable unknowns. Yet importantly, Monet's divergence from Lang's narrative is based in the reimagined understanding and cause of the narrative's revolution. Though both Robot Maria and Cindy Mayweather incite revolutions, the former, in the original film, is presented as a seducer of men with one goal to sow chaos and discord as directed by her maker and master. Mayweather, on the other hand, is positioned as an inadvertent revolutionary by falling in love with a human and breaking a core law of this reimagined, unjust, and oppressive society. Monet's Afrofuturist feminist reimagining of who and what comprises the city of Metropolis therefore highlights inequalities, specifically the systemic racism found in current American culture, which she distinctly references throughout the video, both sonically and visually. Now for the video. So marketed as a short film, Many Moons opens with a black screen that announces the annual Metropolis Android Auction, creating a larger narrative space that encompasses the song. The overall color palette of the video is overwhelmingly black, white, and gray with limited pops of color. Monet, as Cindy, appears in a white tuxedo jacket with black lapels, black silk tie and an oversized bow, white tuxedo shirt, black high-water pants, and black and white Oxford shoes, so head to toe black and white. And I'm just going to play the first minute or so of the video. And this is setting up.
Who built your life? Angels or demons? God or a computer? It's a simple question, isn't it? But who cares what the answer is, as long as it's beautiful? Metropolis, in one place we offer you the finest fashions and androids money can buy. The Alpha Platinum 9000. And now, the prototype of the line, the toast of the town, Cindy Mayweather. Let the begin begin.
showed that much because I wanted you to start seeing some of her multi-egos, which I'll talk about in a second. Also, that is actually the Sesame Street pinball number count medley in the, as she calls it, the voodoo doo-wopping. So while her stylized androgynous clothing will be discussed below, I would like to first focus on the numerous ways in which Monet's personhood is shown and used throughout the video. Monet is featured here as a multitude of characters, all replicas of the Cindy Mayweather prototype. The replicas make up the auctioned androids and Lady Maestra, master of the show droids, who you saw on the horse. This embodiment of a multitude of characters in one location can be an aspect of Afrofuturist works. Instead of a splitting up of selfhood, these multiple identities allow for a freedom from such ideas. Kodo Oshun, for example, writes of how, for the Afrofuturist, the self no longer amputates itself down to a single part, but instead asserts that I is a crowd, that the human is a population of processes. Various heteronyms are systematically fictionalized from the flux that we all float in. What used to be called alter egos are now multi-egos, a crowd of synthetic subjects. And Monet, through her multi-egos, creates a different understanding of subjectivity for the audience. The many incarnations of Monet's bodies allow her to showcase her black female body as many black female bodies. By doing so, Monet creates for herself or herselves an identity that is inherently critical of contemporary society. Monet is simultaneously creating a new selfhood while actively dissenting from the existing order. Even though the narrative of the video is quite literally an auction featuring Monet's multi-egos to the highest bidder, the function of her black female body is different from those found in most other videos by contemporary popular artists. Chanel Redman, in her article This Safer Space, Janelle Monet's Cold War, speaks to how, historically, black women have been particularly prone to fantastical representations and notions of sexuality that are out of the subject's control. However, Redman argues, Monet uses her erotic power to both present a new kind of black female sexuality while fighting the one currently found within the music video genre. Taking this argument further, I find Monet's erotic power in this video to be purposefully less heterosexually or normalized feminine, which carves out a very different space for defiance against the stereotypes that traditionally keep black female bodies static objects of desire. For while, as James argues, quote, the robo-diva figure challenges entrenched aesthetic norms and gender-race politics by asserting her black femininity and technological prowess, end quote, Monet importantly bucks the virgin whore dichotomy that so many of these figures have been caught up in, including, importantly, Lang's human Maria and robot Maria dichotomy of virgin whore. For example, the combination of the clothing, hair, and makeup choices for her multi-egos gives the appearance of an affected androgyny, which is at times accomplished through gender ambiguity. Even in her many iterations, Monet's style never really typically allows the typical demarcation of highly heteronormative sexualized desire. Furthermore, Monet places herself within the history of black dandyism throughout her costuming. And these are examples of her multi-egos and how they're costumed and auctioned off. Black dandyism was a practice in which slave owners would use their male slaves as costumed objects designed to trumpet the wealth, status, and power of white masters. The auction in Many Moons is a reincarnation of these practices, both of black dandyism and the auctioning of slaves as property, with Monet's multi-egos and outfits that mimic high-class symbols of wealth via leisure pastimes. That Monet places herself in this aspect of history for black male fashion mixes some of the normalized signs of gender, bending her aesthetic towards a more neutral space between traditional gender articulations. Black dandyism was all about fashion of clothing rather than function, meaning it was already leaning towards at least our modern definition of androgyny by mixing traditional heteronormative male and female visual signifiers. Monet then plays with that history and its typical gendered subject, creating an androgynous space while recalling the exploitative history of such a practice. Monet also bends her race at the beginning of the video, as you saw. This self-conscious construction of race recalls Donna Haraway's seminal essay Cyborg Manifesto, for, as Haraway notes, quote, gender, race, or class consciousness is an achievement forced on us by the terrible historical experience of the contradictory social realities of patriarchy, colonialism, and capitalism, end quote. And showing how thoroughly constructed Mayweather and the other android bodies are, Monet as her multi-egos further reflects Haraway's cyborg as third gender. of being totally outside of the way organic humans are constructed or understand their construction, these beings of the androids do not conform to the norms, gender, race, or class as we organic humans do. They are assigned these things. The visuals I have been discussing are deeply tied to the sonic space of the video, as from even the first moment, which you heard and saw, there's no separation from the two senses. The tight harmonies of the strings that sonically open the video are reminiscent of the romantic orchestral string arrangements from the golden age of Hollywood's film scores. In the EP's booklet, they're even called the Vincent Price strings. The nod to lowercase c classical music from the opening scene gives the video's audience a sense of the grandeur and wealth of this apparent high society. You know from the music and the visuals that this auction is meant for those who have serious money to throw around. The short phrases with their upward motion give the opening scene energy and excitement as reflected by the carefree expressions of most of the auction's audience. The diegetic sounds of the on-screen audience, along with the diegetic sounds of the futuristic technology featured, give the video a sonic space more akin to cinematic work than traditional music videos, which helps the video's audience believe in this imagined future and its narrative. Once the musical performance within this short film begins, however, the diegetic sounds are limited to the crowd that's there for Cindy Mayweather's performance rather than the auction goers, and even that fades in and out throughout the song. One of the most powerful moments is when Monet as Mayweather takes off her tuxedo jacket and tosses it to the crowd. The wild mania that ensues from touching a piece of Mayweather is not unlike Beatlemaniacs or Believers at a concert or show. Mayweather's audience is made up of slightly rabid white females adds the idea that gender for the androids and black female bodies of multi-egos do not conform to the rules of traditional heteronormativity and hypersexuality. When analyzed as a closed object within the video, the song contains three main sections: verses and chorus, the cybernetic chant down, and the closing lullaby. The first section lyrically maps out the longing for freedom and the continual knocking down of dreams, referencing the violence of marginalization. The vocal range remains in the middle and lower range for Monet, sonically reinforcing the androgynous visuals. The vocal lines also tend to arc downwards, keeping the range low and grounded. For example, on the refrain's second line, broken dreams, no sunshine, endless crimes, we long for freedom, Monet's repetition of freedom contains a melisma that first floats upward before coming back down, emphasizing just how in a bind their freedom is. The same is true for the last line of the chorus, featuring the same melismatic arc on the word love, connecting the concepts while keeping them sonically depressed. The cybernetic chant down, Monet's label, not mine, is a speech rap break that features Monet's speech register, which tends to sit lower than the melodic lines of the first section. Visually, this section begins with Monet's face tightly framed with sepia tone images from the 1960s civil rights movement projected over her face, spilling onto the background behind her. The terrible recent history of the oppression of black Americans is branded on Monet's skin, reminding the video's audience of how recent the civil rights movement was while placing Monet in that history. This collapsing of linear time, as typically understood in Western history, within an Afrofuturist framework is called synchronicity, through which Afrofuturist thought sees the potential codification of black culture through a collapsing of past, present, and future. The full synchronicity of this moment in the video is expressed as images of the other Alpha Platinums backstage when they join in to enunciate the lyrics, reminding the audience of the futuristic venue in which this is taking place. The images might seem otherwise far removed from this imagined future, yet through Monet's collapsing of linear time, she reminds the audience of just how far we have not come. Additionally, in true Afrofuturist synchronicity, Monet packs every word in the chant down with meaning. All of these words and phrases in some form or another are a part of history of marginalized people, an idea that is reflected in the images that are projected onto Monet's body. Towards the end of the chant down, the camera cuts become more frantic, and by the last line of Dirty Lies, My Regards, the fast cuts abruptly stop, with Monet as Mayweather's stationary head shown in her pre-assigned race state against the background of an atomic bomb being detonated and the subsequent mushroom cloud. The commentary I read here is the ultimate collapse of all the histories of marginalized people that have been traumatically and violently erased, expressed as arguably the single most devastatingly violent moment of America's history. After the audience's eye has been left to settle on this horrifying image, the music speeds up, and in combination with the return of fast cuts, shaky images, and Monet's frenetic dancing, the breakdown into the song's final section, the lullaby, comes as a welcome visual and sonic relief. Mayweather, in a dancing frenzy, has malfunctioned and levitated off the ground, and Mayweather's body is then struck by green lightning or electrical charge, recalling Robot Maria's creation scene from Lang's Metropolis, though here the charge seems to disable Mayweather rather than act as a source of life energy. Throughout the lullaby, both multi-egos of Lady Maestra and a dazed Mayweather are seen singing, which serves as a visual and auditory blurring between the two multi-egos. The vocals are light, especially compared to the previous sections, and the effect of layered multiplicity and echo expands the sonic space of the lullaby. All of the extra sonic layers outside of the song are completely cut out at this point in the song, closing off the sonic space to the narrative space of the video, and the dropout of the beat gives the section a free-floating feeling. The lullaby ends, and with Mayweather's seeming demise, the silence that accompanies these final images is powerful. The sonic ride the audience has taken from the very first second of the video makes the silence a profound one, giving closure and gravity to the video as a whole. Throughout the entirety of the video, all of Monet's choices, from visual signifiers to lyrical content, reflects the assertion of agency of the liberated voice that bell hooks argues for. Monet most definitely talks back through the video. In constructing an androgynous and ambiguous self or selves, Monet can maneuver through numerous identities and discourses, and like her video's multi-egos, can present herself through the I as crowd mentality. Through Monet's display of multi-layered flexibility of selfhood and her use of an Afrofuturist feminist reimagining of the narrative from Lang's Metropolis, she takes the power, her power, and fashions herself a space as a subject rather than object, and she speaks as a liberated voice. Thank you.
We have time for some questions.
7?
Thank you so much for this paper. I was wondering if, so she goes through this process of like dealing with Afrofuturism, right? And then she comes out with the Arcandroid, and there's this whole sort of real sort of intense grappling with that. And then I wonder about if you have thoughts about her later works. I'm thinking about especially yoga, and then her sort of work with the Wonderland Collective, right, with Jadenis doing his like real throwback thing, which seems to be having a different relationship to race and also the present, in the sense that if I think like there's a lot of her actually being in the present rather than being in ungrounded spaces, right? Like the Many Moons is in the future, and then Tightrope is sort of in Sun Ra's spaces, the places, right? But then when we get into some of these other moments, her recent things are really, frame her a bit more heterosexual, and frame her more in the present with other people. And I'm wondering what you think about this shift that's happened from a space where talking about her sexuality was like, I'm attracted to robots, to this moment where she's sort of framed in male-female pairings, and collaborations. I'm wondering what you think about this sort of shift.
That's a really interesting question. Thank you for that. I have a lot of thoughts about that, and I think one of the biggest things that feels like it jumps out to me is, especially when revisiting the different stages of this work where she's Cindy Mayweather, and which to me kind of culminated in the video for Queen with Erykah Badu, where there's a lot of queer references in that song and in that video, both between her and other women and her multi-egos. So like this kind of like self-pleasure And I think I find it really interesting that she started with the more radical and moved towards, like, once she created the space for herself where she made it okay for herself to do whatever she really felt was expressive, and then move to a more normative space. Like, I feel like a lot of times that's the opposite that we see in trajectories of careers. And to me, I think it feels like she's moved into a background role, which means that she is giving herself less space to be vocal in her music, in the music of the Wonderland Collective, which is, like, she's the CEO of. And so she has the ultimate power over Jidenna and Deep Cotton and the other artists that are on that label, both male and female. And while in the videos it kind of seems like she's like presenting herself as like another woman, that Jidenna is like, you know, I love women, like, just because, like, they're sexy and they have nothing, like, much else to offer. The power that she's given and gives herself, I think, informs that in kind of weird and complicated ways, which is really interesting. And but I think also too, because she started moving on to other projects, like she's done 2 different films, and she's been super, super active in the Black Lives Matter movement. She's still creating those spaces for herself, of giving herself that agency and taking those moments of power, no matter how she's saying what she's saying, whether it's heteronormative or non. She's got a lot of agency, and that's never changed. So even in yoga, there's a lot of agency, even though what she's expressing is more heteronormative than not.
Any other questions? Grace?
Hi. Thank you for your paper. This isn't even a well-formulated question, but something that was very concerning to me in the video clips that you showed was the riot police, riot police in all white, in both the beginning and the end, to me, hinting at that they don't actually leave. They're there in the beginning, and they're there on her last breath. Mm-hmm. And then also that Android auction, to me, slave auction block, also doesn't leave. Sure, it transforms into a performance space, but it's not destabilized. It's there throughout the entire video. And so I would like to hear more about the way that you read her talking back while those things stay in place.
Thank you for that. There's so much in this video that I actually really wish that I could talk more about, and that's one of the things that that I do find also really, really interesting. I think her commentary it doesn't go away, and I think that's part of the point. It's part of her point to say that she's not in this video. She doesn't necessarily overcome. She's creating a space for herself to have agency, but it's talking back, but it's not necessarily being totally successful yet. And I don't think those two things are necessarily like you are successful, or I think that you don't necessarily have to have one or the other to be a liberated voice, as I read it. Because I think the fact that there are riot police and that it's the auction block are very, very powerful, and I think she's placing herself in that history to showcase just how heinous and weird and like just awful all of that was. I think that's really, really purposeful, and I think it's really purposeful that she dies on that block. Like I think all of that stuff is stepping towards the Cindy Mayweather concept doesn't begin and end with this video. It's not like this isn't the end. This is the beginning. So yes, there's not a full achievement, but this is the step that she starts carving out that space for herself, and that's how I'm reading the video. I don't know if that addresses some of those concerns. Okay.